What if I told you that the very things the West celebrates today, from Hollywood's deadliest fight scenes to the newest superfoods and the most sought-after corporate values, were born from a culture that colonial powers spent centuries mocking as primitive? What if the imitators actually became the innovators and the self-proclaimed masters became the students? This isn't just a thought experiment. This is the story of how the world is slowly but surely catching up to the genius of Filipino culture. It's a story of mockery, resilience, and the ultimate delicious irony. For nearly 400 years, the Philippines was under the thumb of two colonial powers, first Spain and then the United States. And throughout this long, painful period, a single narrative was hammered into the Filipino consciousness. You are inferior. Spanish chroniclers and friars, while sometimes showing a grudging curiosity, largely painted a picture of a people who were either childlike pagans or untrustworthy savages. They saw indigenous beliefs as devil worship and communal living as a lack of ambition. A famous chronicler who sailed with Magellan, Antonio Pigafetta, swung between describing the natives as pleasant and conversible and as heathens who needed the light of Christianity. It was the classic colonial playbook. Define a people as uncivilized, and you create the moral justification to dominate them for their own good. But the mockery took on a new, perhaps more sinister form when the Americans arrived at the turn of the 20th century. The United States, new to the empire game, had to justify its own colonial project. Their story was one of benevolent assimilation. They weren't there to conquer, they claimed, but to civilize and educate their little brown brothers. This condescending mission was put on full display at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair. In a sprawling 47-acre exhibit, hundreds of Filipinos from various ethnic groups were put on display like zoo animals. The Igorot people, in particular, were sensationalized. Their traditional attire and documented practice of eating dog meat were used to horrify and fascinate American audiences, reinforcing the idea of Filipinos as primitives in desperate need of American guidance. It was a calculated racist spectacle designed to prove how backward the Philippines was, and therefore how necessary American occupation was. This attitude trickled down into every part of the colonial administration. American officials like Dr. Victor Heiser, a director of health, openly complained about the so-called Filipino character. He described Filipinos as pathetic imitators, whose skills were more apparent than real. He called them faithful imitators of apes. And he wasn't alone. This was a pervasive view from the top. Filipinos were framed as a race of mimics, lacking originality and true intellect. They could copy the motions of civilization, the Americans argued, but they couldn't grasp its soul. And this kind of psychological warfare takes a toll. Generations of Filipinos were taught to feel ashamed of their own identity. This is the root of what psychologists now call colonial mentality, an internalized oppression where the colonized start to believe in the superiority of the colonizer. It showed up in a preference for whiter skin, sparking a huge market for skin-whitening products. It led to the denigration of Filipino features, like brown skin and a flatter nose, in favor of Eurocentric ones. Speaking English was seen as a mark of high society, while native languages were often looked down upon. This created a deep sense of cultural dislocation. As Professor E.J. David, an expert on the topic, explains, colonial mentality is linked to lower self-esteem and depression. It's the feeling of being an alien in your own skin, of looking in the mirror and seeing something that needs to be fixed or westernized. It's the painful belief that native means backward and foreign means better. The colonizers mocked Filipino culture as primitive or at best a poor copy of something better. They laughed at the traditions, dismissed the knowledge, and belittled the people. But they made one critical mistake. They underestimated the one thing they couldn't stamp out: Filipino resilience. They didn't realize that while they were busy mocking, Filipinos were busy preserving. And what they preserved would one day be so valuable that the colonizers' own descendants would come asking to learn. How do you keep a culture alive when it's being actively suppressed? How do you practice the art of the sword when just carrying a blade is illegal? You hide it in plain sight. This is the story of Filipino Martial Arts, or FMA, which includes arts like arnis, eskrima, and kali. When the Spanish first arrived, they were stunned by the locals' skill with blades. Pigafetta himself documented the battle readiness of the people they met. The warriors of Mactan, led by Lapu-Lapu, proved how deadly their native fighting arts were against Magellan's armored soldiers. The Spanish, realizing the danger, banned the carrying of swords. But the arts didn't die, they went underground. They shapeshifted. It's widely believed that the movements of the blade, the footwork, the angles of attack, they were embedded into the most harmless-looking cultural expressions, folk dances. Think about that for a second. Imagine a village festival full of music and laughter. The Spanish friars watch, maybe with a smug smile, seeing the natives engaged in harmless fun. But what they might have been watching was a masterclass in combat training. Take the dance sakuting, which uses sticks. To the untrained eye, it's a rhythmic, playful dance. But to an escrimador, it's a drill for double stick fighting. The clicking of the sticks isn't just for rhythm, it's the sound of a block, a strike, a parry. Or consider the maglalatik, the coconut shell dance. Dancers wear coconut shells on their chests, backs and limbs, striking them in a mock battle. It looks like a festive, energetic show, but in reality, it may be a living textbook of unarmed combat. The shells mark the primary targets on the human body, and the dance itself is a flow of trapping and boxing techniques hidden in the choreography. Even the beloved tinikling, where dancers step between clapping bamboo poles, is thought to hold a martial secret. The dance, mimicking a bird avoiding traps, is an intense agility drill. It trains the practitioner to move with speed, precision, and timing, exactly the skills needed to navigate a chaotic fight. This was an act of defiant genius. Every flick of the wrist in a dance, every rhythmic step, was a quiet rebellion. It was a way of saying, you can take our swords, but you can't take our spirit. You can burn our books, but you can't erase the knowledge that lives in our bodies. This resilience was put to the ultimate test during World War II. When the Japanese invaded, American forces retreated, and the Filipino people were left to face a brutal occupation. A massive resistance movement arose from the mountains and jungles. Estimates suggest that as many as 260,000 Filipinos joined guerrilla forces, tying down the Japanese army and feeding crucial intelligence to the Allies. And the weapon of choice for many of these fighters, the very arts the Spanish had tried to extinguish. Armed often with just their bolos, knives, and eskrima skills, they waged a terrifyingly effective campaign of jungle warfare against heavily armed Japanese soldiers. They used their intimate knowledge of the terrain and mastery of close-quarters combat to become a constant deadly threat. The Japanese, like the Spanish before them, had superior firepower. But the Filipino guerrillas had a superior system honed over centuries of struggle. They proved in the most brutal way imaginable that their primitive arts were not just practical, they were lethal. The war was a horrific chapter, but it was also a moment of profound validation. The secret was out. The dances had kept the art alive, and the art had kept the people fighting. The colonizers had mocked the culture, but that same culture had become the backbone of a nationwide fight for freedom. And the world was about to take notice. And here's where our story comes full circle. Here's where the mockery curdles into the most profound irony. The very cultural elements that were dismissed as primitive are now being eagerly sought after, studied, and celebrated by the Western cultures that once ridiculed them. Let's start with the most dramatic reversal: Filipino martial arts. Remember how FMA was banned and hidden in dances? Today, those same arts are considered among the most sophisticated and effective blade and close-quarters combat systems in the world. They're a key part of training for the Philippine military and police. But the irony goes global. The United States military, the same institution that once looked down on Filipinos, now incorporates FMA into the training for some of its most elite units, like the Navy SEALs and other special forces. Why? For one simple reason: it works. It's practical, adaptable, and brutally effective. Police departments across the US and Europe now train their officers in FMA for weapon retention and self-defense, realizing how well it works in real-world violent encounters. And then there's Hollywood. The next time you watch a big action movie, pay close attention to the fight scenes. That blur of motion, the seamless switch from empty hand to knife to stick, that's often FMA. The Jason Bourne film series? Matt Damon was extensively trained in Kali, the breathtaking knife fights in the John Wick franchise, pure Filipino martial arts. The fight choreography in blockbusters like Dune, The Book of Eli, and the Marvel Universe is heavily infused with the principles your grandparents might have seen hidden in a folk dance. The ultimate irony: an art form suppressed because it was too dangerous for the natives is now taught to elite soldiers and glorified in movies because it's so lethally effective. The mockery has become high praise. Now let's head to the kitchen. For decades, Filipino food was the underdog of Asian cuisine. While Thai and Vietnamese food went global, Filipino food was often dismissed by Western palates as weird. It was called brown food, unrefined, too sour, or too funky. The use of vinegar, fermented shrimp paste, bagoong, and offal was seen as unsophisticated. The infamous balut was often just a punchline. For many Filipino immigrants, there was a sense of shame, a feeling that they should hide their home cooking. And then the late, great Anthony Bourdain came along. He fell in love with Filipino food, not despite its bold flavors, but because of them. He famously called Cebu's lechon the best pig ever and predicted that sisig, a sizzling dish made from parts of a pig's head, was ready to take the world by storm. He was right. Today, we're in the middle of a Filipino food renaissance. In 2022, Kasama in Chicago became the world's first Filipino restaurant to earn a Michelin star. All over the world, modern Filipino restaurants are opening to rave reviews. Chefs like Tom Cunanan and Lord Maynard Lera are winning prestigious James Beard Awards, the Oscars of the food world. Ube, the purple yam, has gone from a local staple to a global trend, showing up in everything from donuts to lattes. Calamansi is the new it citrus in craft cocktails. The very flavors once mocked as unfamiliar are now celebrated for their complexity. The brown food is now earning gold stars. The cuisine once hidden in homes out of shame is now one of the hottest trends on the global culinary scene. Finally, let's talk about values. Colonizers painted Filipinos as lazy, mistaking a community-oriented culture for a lack of individual drive. The core Filipino value of Bayanihan is the perfect example. Its iconic image is of villagers coming together to physically lift a neighbor's house to move it. It's the spirit of communal unity and helping others without expecting anything in return. To a hyper-individualistic Western mindset, this could seem inefficient. But what's happening in the West right now? We're seeing an epidemic of loneliness. Experts are sounding the alarm about the breakdown of community and the mental health crisis that stems from extreme individualism. And in the corporate world, what are the new buzzwords? Collaboration, teamwork, and community. Companies spend millions trying to build the very sense of shared purpose that's already baked into Bayanihan. Western society is desperately searching for what Filipino culture never forgot. We are stronger together. The idea of Pakikipagkapwa, of treating others with a shared sense of humanity, is now rebranded in business schools as empathy. The value of Malasakit, or deep, genuine care for others, is what every organization now claims to want in its leaders. The communal spirit once dismissed as backward is now being sought as the antidote to the social decay of modern societies. This journey of rediscovery is happening all around us, but so many of these stories still go untold. Think about your own life. Have you ever felt a pressure to downplay your heritage only to see it become cool years later? Maybe it was a food your classmates thought was weird, or a language you were told not to speak. Share your story in the comments below. What's one element of Filipino culture that you are proud of, that you believe the world is only now beginning to appreciate? By sharing our experiences, we don't just validate our own journey, we help write the next chapter in this incredible story of vindication. Let's create a library of our reclaimed pride, right here, right now. So, why did this happen? Why the great, ironic reversal? Is the West just always hungry for the new and exotic, or is it something deeper? The answer is simple. Reality has a way of asserting itself. You can mock something for centuries, but you can't argue with results. Filipino martial arts were adopted because they are brutally effective. FMA is a system born from necessity in a land that has faced constant conflict. It's not a sport with rules. It's a science of survival. Its genius is its adaptability. The principles for fighting with a stick are the same for fighting with a blade, a pen, or your empty hands. In a world demanding practical solutions for complex threats, FMA provides an efficient answer. Its value wasn't determined by a colonizer's opinion, but by its performance in real-world violence. Filipino food is trending because it is, quite simply, delicious. The combination of sour, salty, sweet, and savory is a masterclass in flavor. The use of fermentation, once seen as primitive, is now understood by modern science to be great for gut health and creating complex flavors. What was once dismissed as peasant food is now recognized for its resourcefulness and zero-waste philosophy. Using every part of the animal isn't just about taste, but about respect. The world's palate didn't just get more adventurous, it got smarter, and it finally caught up to the sophisticated flavors that Filipino cooks have mastered for generations. And the value of Bayanihan is being re-examined because the social experiment of radical individualism is showing its cracks. A society that prizes the me over the we eventually pays a heavy price in loneliness and social fragmentation. Bayanihan isn't about sacrificing the self. It's about understanding that the self is strongest within a supportive community. It is a social technology for resilience. In an increasingly disconnected world, the profound human connection at the heart of Filipino values has become more valuable than ever. This isn't about appropriation. This is about vindication. It's about the undeniable value of a culture that was strong enough to survive centuries of suppression. The colonizers' mockery was based on ignorance. They judged a culture by how much it looked like their own, failing to understand the genius of systems perfectly adapted to a different history and environment. They called Filipinos imitators, but maybe the greatest Filipino art has been the ability to take foreign influences, Spanish, American, Chinese, Malay, and weave them into something uniquely, powerfully Filipino without ever losing its core. For centuries, to be Filipino was to be told you were less than. Your culture was primitive, your food was strange, your ways were backward. Today, the script has been flipped. The world's toughest soldiers are learning our primitive fighting arts. The world's most discerning foodies are celebrating our strange food. And the world's most advanced societies are looking for answers in our backward values. The greatest irony of all is this. The colonial powers that spent centuries trying to erase Filipino culture are gone. Their empires have crumbled. But the culture they mocked endures. It's not just surviving, it's thriving. It is influencing, it is leading, and it is being copied. The lesson here is a powerful one. Culture isn't a hierarchy. There is no primitive or advanced. There is only what works, what endures, and what nourishes the human spirit. The Filipino story is a testament to the power of a people who, despite every effort to make them feel small, never forgot the greatness coded into their songs, their dances, their food, and their very way of life. They were never just imitators. They were and are masters of resilience, and the world is finally ready to learn. So let me ask you one last question. What other hidden gems of Filipino culture do you think the world is about to discover?